All right, it's time for another pop culture review. Let's talk Suicide Squad by James Gunn, directed by James Gunn. Now, the Suicide Squad is this really interesting group of DC anti heroes and DC villains. That the whole idea is that there's a government official, Amanda Waller, who puts these guys together to go on kind of the missions that nobody else will do. And so the whole kind of purpose of this movie and kind of the plot of this movie is that she puts the Suicide Squad together to go on a mission to end this really horrific scientific experiments in this kind of island nation called Corto Maltese. So as she puts together this group, they ended up showing up on the island, and really it ends up being two groups. And so you can see that one is a distraction and one is the actual group that's going to go in and infiltrate. Now, really from the group that is kind of drives the movie, there's some really interesting characters here. There's a character called Bloodsport, which is kind of really you kind of see it as this offshoot of Deadshot from the original Suicide Squad movie. But really, it's an interesting character that Idris Elba, who's a great actor, brings to life in really interesting ways. You have Peacemaker, who is this kind of, I've heard him kind of described as douchey Captain America, which is pretty accurate, played by John Cena, the wrestler. And John Cena actually does a great job in this role, although I kind of, as the movie got to the end and the turn that he takes, I'm kind of like, it's very cliche. And then you also see a person on the Suicide Squad called Ratcatcher 2 who can actually call rats. And I honestly, it's an actress I've never seen before, so I'm doing this review. I probably should have looked up her name. I don't remember her name. And then you have the Polka Dot Man, who's played by David Dastmalchian, who probably most well known for being one of the Scott Lang's buddies in Ant-Man. And then and I mispronounce his name every time. And then King Shark, who is actually voiced by Sylvester Stallone. And so these guys show up on the island, and the whole goal is, can they end this scientific experiment? Can they break in this facility and end this scientific experiment? And then in the other team, they end up also picking up who survived, Rick Flag, who's from the original Suicide Squad movie, and Harley Quinn, who's also from the original Suicide Squad movie. And so kind of my take on this movie is that really this movie, as far as the characters in it, super vivid. You'll never forget these characters. My personal favorites, I think Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn is great. She's really good in that role. But my personal two favorites are actually two of the more kind of external ones. I think Polka Dot Man is a really interesting layered character. And then King Shark as well. I really would love to see movies on Polka Dot Man and King Shark. And based on the events of this movie, there's likely one of those we won't see movies on. But very vivid characters. But really one of my qualms with it is this movie is just brutal. Like, I went into this movie thinking, oh, this would be like Guardians of the Galaxy. I really love Guardians of the Galaxy with some kind of, there'll be a little bit more kind of real life action in it to get the R rating, and people will curse. But as you get into the movie, the first 5 minutes is very obvious. This movie is brutal. And it really took me back a little bit. Like, I really don't like movies like that as much. Movies that are super brutal. I don't like seeing the blood and gore. I love war movies, and I love if it's kind of realistic violence. That's one thing that has a purpose to the story, but just having kind of blood and gore that kind of is just there to be blood and gore is a little out of my comfort zone, I guess is probably what I would say. But as you build through the movie does have these great characters that kind of continuous through, and it's funny too. So really, if I had to kind of rate this, I'd probably give it a 3.5 to a 4 star rather than 5 star, just because it's got that brutality that I honestly didn't like as much. I love James Gunn. I think the Guardians movies are some of my favorite movies in the Marvel universe. And I thought, he's going to get this great kind of cast of characters, and he's going to play with these misfits and kind of have a great movie. But I think watching it, I would hope that somebody would at least not dampen his creative vision, but at least give him some guardrails saying you can't step over this line. And I think that's what happens in the Marvel universe as well. So would I say watch the Suicide Squad? Sure, but be ready. It gets gory quick.